In this thrilling episode of Gold Shields, Tom and Dan interview retired Australian police detectives Peter Hogan and Scott Rogan, who are also the hosts of the popular podcast, Watching Two Detectives. They will discuss a remarkable investigations from the land down under. In this episode, they dive into the heartbreaking murder of Michael Furlong, a case that deeply affected them and the community. Join us as they share the stories and insights from their experiences as two of Australia's finest detectives. They'll take us through the challenges they faced and the lessons learned while pursuing justice. It's an enlightening look into the realities of crime solving you won't want to miss. New York's finest meets Australians' finest on this overseas episode. Tune in to Gold Shields.
Gold Shields brings true stories from law enforcement, the military, true crime authors, and first responders. Experience the dedication, danger, and emotional toll with the heroes themselves. These gripping tales of true crimes, true stories, and true heroes are all here on Gold Shields.
Hey, welcome back again to Gold Shields. This is Dan Murphy, along with my partner in crime, Tom Smith. How are you today, pal?
Good, partner. Here we go again, huh?
Yeah, I'm excited about today. We had a great talk the other day with these two gentlemen that are going to be our guests, and I think our audience is just going to love this show. And Tom and I, this is one of our shows we're going to be fans, right? We're just going to sit back and go, roll, guys, because, and I won't tell you who they are. I'll let Tom introduce them. But before that, we have some business we always take care of. We'd like to talk about our friends, the people that help us keep the lights on here. Tom, who do we want to say thank you to?
Yep. A big thanks and shout out to our premier sponsor, Streamlight. Streamlight.com, Streamlight flashlights. They take care of law enforcement and the military all around the world. Dangerous situations. Listen, nighttime operations, arrests, patrol, all that are the most dangerous out there. And when you have a Streamlight on your belt and you can shine that and light up an alleyway or light up the inside of a car, it helps tremendously and it puts you a little bit more at ease when you're dealing with those situations. So Streamlight.com, go check them out. Some amazing flashlights they got and some new ones coming out soon. Streamlight.com. And our other big thing that we do that is close to our heart is Copline. Copline.org. Everyone out there in law enforcement knows someone who needs to talk to someone or has known someone that reached out and got help, which makes all the difference in the world in someone's life. Copline.org, 1-800-267-5463. Keep that number, give it to a friend, give it to someone who needs it. It's completely confidential. All law enforcement members are receiving calls. They're trained and they're ready to take on any situation that is in front of them. So Copline.org, 1-800-267-5463.
Great people at Copline. We love them, and we want to personally let everybody know in law enforcement, it is a sign of strength to ask for help, not weakness. It's a sign of strength. It's a tough job. You're a human being. We want you to live a great life after your retirement, too. So if you need them, give them a call. Last plug, shameless, is for our own product, right? CarryImpact.com, CarryImpact.com, the OC alternative that is taking off among law enforcement agencies. And we are trying to keep up with the orders. It's been a blast, and the interest is off the charts. Why? Because Impact is an alternative spray to pepper spray. Law enforcement doesn't like to use pepper spray because of all the downside. Our stuff doesn't have the downside. Check it out. Get it for your own carry. Buy it for your family, your loved ones. CarryImpact.com. See the difference and never be a victim. Tom, who do we have today?
You know what? We found these two guys, scrolling through, I don't know, Google or some crap. No, I'm only kidding. We actually got introduced, and this all got hooked up through Sarah Ferris, who is an incredible woman who has this production company, media company. And these two gentlemen are part of that with an absolutely jaw-dropping, great podcast that they host called Watching Two Detectives. They are from Australia. They are our friends down under, and we cannot be more thrilled than to hook up the United States and Australia on Gold Shields tonight. And we have Scott Rogan, Peter Hogan. You guys, could you get your names closer together to screw me up trying to do this? But yeah, both retired from Australian Police Department. They will get into their police department, New South Wales. And guys, thank you so much for coming and being on our show. And good morning in Australia.
Good morning from tomorrow in Australia.
So you're
Living in
talking
the
to
future.
us from the future. Yeah.
We
Living
are
in the future, boys.
We are. We're a couple of hours into Sunday, Friday, I should say. I don't even know what day it is. Friday. And yeah, thank you for having us on your show. We were just blown away when Sarah said, "Hey, you've got to speak to the boys from Gold Shield. You'll love them." And we've had a couple of chats now, and yeah, we've been binging your pod as well. And
well, thank you for that.
Yeah, and I can't agree with you more. Sarah Ferris in her production company and some of her pods, which I think you're going to speak to her at one stage.
Yep, sure are.
Very interesting lady.
Yeah. Gents, thank you so much for this opportunity. We're truly humbled, and we're really appreciative of this opportunity to come on and chat. And we've had a few chats already, and we've just got that bond, I think, which is a common bond in blue that we've spoken about, and no doubt we'll speak about that through the episode. But we were fortunate to be introduced to you guys through Sarah Ferris and Sarah Ferris Media. And, I guess we'll go through Sarah's shows in this conversation. But, yeah, thank you so much for providing this opportunity for us, guys. We really appreciate it.
Well, we're honored to have you two gentlemen. You've had distinguished careers. You have an amazing podcast. You have a great communicative style. And we know our audience is going to love when you start talking about some of the stuff you're going to talk about today. But, you mentioned the bond, and it's really true. And I've seen this as I've traveled around the world. If you stop to talk to a police officer, no matter where you are in the world, and if you properly identify yourself to them and just say, hey, just wanted to say hi, you will find that you have more in common with that person in the first 2 minutes than you do with people you know in your life for years, because you both know what it's like to do this type of work, and it's the same. They may be called different, maybe different levels of things, but for the most part, it's dealing with people in terrible situations on the worst day of their life and helping them get through it and helping resolve issues that are life-changing, if not life-ending. And it's a unique line of work. And so we have so much in common that it only takes, if we sat down and ordered a pint, within 20 minutes, we're like, I know you, right? I mean, you know me, we know each other. It is a unique bond. And we found that, like you said, with you guys, wasn't long on the phone. I know these guys. They're already friends. And I love that about this profession. And we hope to keep that culture alive within the profession, the recognition that it doesn't matter where you do it, the work impacts you the same, you learn the same thing about people, and you see the good and the bad. And so it does bring it together, right?
And I've noticed the same thing, Dan. Been away on vacations and run across NYPD guys on the tour, and our wives have got similar experiences. So their bond is immediate for the same reasons, because they've gone through the same issues, and including one stage I was with an former NYPD member at 9/11. He was very quiet, as you can imagine, on 9/11, and all it took from me was just a hand on his shoulder and say to him, "I'm here if you need me." He knew immediately that he had that support from somebody that could help him through it. and somebody that wasn't going to tread on. He needed some space. So it's good that I could support him, and he knew that he had support there if he needed to tell somebody.
That's outstanding. That is outstanding. Thank you for doing that.
Something we all do for each other.
And it just shows, there's no oceans, there's no land, there's nothing. It's one community. There's one family. And you hear this all over the world. And that's why this show is important to do, to just show that this is a worldwide family of support, both like you just said, with families as well as just us. Families bond because everyone's going through the same thing. Just quick, guys, let's run down your incredible careers. You're both thankfully retired and healthy and all that good stuff. But let's run through a quick bio of each of you and get to know the audience, get to know you a little bit.
Hogs, you go first.
I was going to say, Rogues, you go first.
Typical partners.
Yeah.
Seniority first. Go on.
All right. Okay. So Scott Rogan, I spent 25 years in the police, New South Wales. So New South Wales is on the east coast of Australia. For those that don't know where we are, it covers Sydney. I did most of my service in Sydney. Over 20 years of that as a detective, mostly in Western Sydney, where the high crime rates are. Not any of the glamorous spots, although I did do a number of years at robbery and serious crime, and I was best part of 10 years an on-call negotiator. I've been retired now since 2012. And interesting, you speak about Copline. Probably with some of that support earlier on, I could still be in. And it's one of the things that, again, is common across the world, is that we've all got those struggles, and quite often our departments don't look after us particularly well.
I'm Peter Hogan. I spent 22 years with the New South Wales Police, detective. Served predominantly in the southwest suburbs of Sydney, where it's a very high crime rate. Scott and I started off at Fairfield, or I started off at Fairfield, and that's where we met, essentially. So I started at Fairfield, worked in uniform, and then progressed through to the detective's office, criminal investigation there, and that's where I met Scott. From there, I went to the robbery and serious crime squad, which was at State Crime Command. So we did the entire state of New South Wales. So we predominantly did armed robberies, kidnappings, product extortions, those sorts of jobs. Moved on to the homicide squad and absolutely loved it. I think, when you talk about your career and where was your favourite place, I think that was my pinnacle. I loved homicide investigations. From that, I moved on and got a sergeant's job, which was back in uniform at Cabramatta. So I worked at Cabramatta for a while, and then moved on back over to police headquarters, where we had a unit where I was involved with human sources and also the missing persons unit. So I think those two key areas of mine as homicide and missing person cases are that's my bread and butter. That's what I love. I think everyone's got that love for a particular role of policing. Someone, it might be undercover work or it's drug work, gangs, firearms, that sort of thing. But for me, it was homicide and missing person investigations. So worked there until my eventual medical retirement from the police. And, it is what it is. It was, due to PTSD and mental illness. And that's part of our advocacy. I think that we really want to stand with our pod is to, say it's okay to have these struggles because we all have them. I think if anyone that dons the blue uniform will have them. And it's okay to have it. And for God's sake, speak up and get some help, because all our brothers together all have it, and we can only get through it by ourselves.
Outstanding. Very well said and very true. Thank you.
Yeah, it just shows again, before we get into, what we really want to talk about, it's amazing how far away you are from us. Let's just take New York and the NYPD. And everything you state from the other side of the world is a conversation Dan and I would state the same thing. We worked here, we did homicides, we loved homicides. This was the bad part of where you worked. This is the high crime area. We went here, and then get into the struggles and how difficult this job is, no matter where you are. And you just prove that being on the other side of the world and still dealing with everything we hear about day in and day out. And you said it right, Pete. You hope just, the phone calls get made and the outreach gets made, so we can get through this horrible time that we're all stuck in with high rates of mental illness and suicide and all that. So very well said.
Okay, so you two gentlemen probably, to Americans, Australia, I've never been there. I'd love to go, and I hope someday to go there and meet you guys there. We tend to think of Australia as this beautiful, faraway place with beautiful beaches and nice people and shrimp on the barbie and all that other stuff, all the stereotypical stuff, because we don't really know much about it. But it's real life, real people, real crime, real stuff. You guys were busy. I mean, you were detectives in West Sydney and in New South Wales. You had your areas where you were busy. And any cop or detective will tell you, you do a career, you're going to have some things that are going to stand out and stay in your memory because they were so memorable for some reason or another. And we put it to you guys right now. What do you think our audience would like to hear about the kind of things that you worked on? What are some cases that you worked on that you'd like to share?
Well, this is part of the reason that we started our podcast, was to sit and talk about some of this stuff that we'd done, that hasn't been in the news. I mean, some of the things that we've done certainly made news at the time, and I mean, I'm thinking back, Hogs, to your experience with the Lynn family. It was huge at the time.
It was a 2009 murder, and I was at Homicide at this stage, and 5 members of a family were brutally bashed in their home whilst asleep by an uncle, and it just was horrendous. There was 3 adults killed. There was 2 boys. So the boys were killed by their uncle, and the boys were awake. So it is a tragic story. I think the Lynn murder would be an episode that we cover in depth, in time, because it's something that needs to be done properly and covered thoroughly. But it was just, in terms of the injuries, guys, it's probably up there with the worst injuries I've seen inflicted on another human being, times 5. It was horrendous.
That's one of the things about detective work. You see the true nature of the savagery that human beings are capable of to each other. And it can be very shocking. It can be very shocking. And more than that, as Detective Tom and I have said this before, and it's true, you don't just go to the scene, write a report, and leave. You are with that case. You're with that family, the surviving people. You're at the autopsy. You're looking at the crime scene pictures. You are preparing for trial. It is part of you now, and you are wrapped up in it. You can't get away from it.
It's embedded, isn't it? You can't go to the wall and flick the switch and forget it. You just can't do that.
Even though we're given the next job to move on to, you still have that connection, and you just form the next connection with the next victim's family. One of the things that's really struck me since we started doing this podcast, and we made a conscious decision for the first series, which is going to be a common thing throughout. We contacted the family and we offered them the opportunity to speak to us. And because this family in series 1, talking about the murder of Michael Furlong at Smithfield, they hadn't been through a trial. There was a mental health process, and the guy that we locked up for it is being detained under the Mental Health Act. So there was never an open trial, and the family had never got to speak about in court about what had happened and the impact on them. The media cycle, they were quickly forgotten about. And Luke, who we spoke to through the series, was a 9-year-old boy at the time. And speaking with them, and then speaking with another family who will appear on series 2, they were dumbfounded that we went to the funerals of their father. And you were saying, Tom, it sticks with us. We're doing all those things, including going to funerals. It's just one of those things that stay with you.
Yeah, and Dan just touched on it. Detective work is different than just responding to a job. You get tied into the families. And that's what I really want to start off, and perfect segue into If Tomorrow Never Comes is the name of the series 1 series involved this case. And it came back a little decades later with Luke and getting hooked up with him. So let's start with the case itself and what happened. It's a heartbreaking case, and it's bizarre. I mean, it's just, it could happen to anybody. That's what, when you start reading it and hearing about what happened, this is a situation where anyone could have fell into with this maniac. And unfortunately, this family fell into it. So let's go through this heartbreaking case.
Yeah, so we were detectives at Fairfield at that stage, and 2002 at Fairfield, it was a crazy, chaotic time with crime. At one stage, we were probably the hotspot in Australia for having so many murders in and around over that entire period that we were really at Fairfield. But taking us back to Michael's case, he and his brother were out shopping and they were looking for electrical components. Michael was a bit of a whiz, and Michael's story is that essentially they were out looking for electrical components that they wanted to install them in cars so it would stop people falling asleep whilst driving, essentially, because there was a lot of road accidents at that time. And he wanted to invent something, have it in the car that could stop people falling asleep at the wheel, essentially. So he was only there to ever do good. So he was out with his brother. They'd gone to an electrical store previously, and then they moved on to Chantronics at Smithfield. And Michael and Glenn was his brother. They effectively parked out the front, walked inside, were inside the store, come out, the components weren't there, come down the stairs, and they were approached by a young man, probably about 29, tall, skinny, long curly hair, and spoke perfectly, like really posh English, essentially, like had a private school background, like really spoke elegantly. And approached them and said, gee, I'm sorry, gentlemen, is this your car over here? And they said, yes. And he said, look, I do apologise, but I've smashed into it effectively. Glenn and Michael, it was Michael's car, walked with him over to the car, and they've walked around the car and said, mate, what are you talking about? Where have you hit the car? And he said, oh, no, it's at the front. So taking him to the front of the car. And once again, it's his car. He's looking at the car, the front bonnet. Man, I can't see anything. And he says, yeah, you're just going to have to bend down here. So he bends him down. So Michael comes standing in front of the car, essentially, like you're in the gutter now. He's not on the path. In the gutter. And he's essentially crouched down trying to look at the front bumper where this damage is. And Sorrel comes up behind him and effectively is over the top of him, grabs a knife, a Bowie knife, and slices his throat. He then lunges at Glenn, and Glenn starts running. He's running for his life, and the offender's after him. Glenn manages to to escape, essentially. The crook turns around, the offender comes back down and disappears. Michael had managed to stagger a short distance, probably about 5 meters, that's all, and collapsed near the stairs of Chamtronics and died almost instantly.
Sorry, one clean slice that near decapitated him. Seriously sharp weapon.
It's just chilling for the fact of, this happened opposite the school, opposite the church. The blessing was that it happened about 5 p.m. in the evening, and not at 3 o'clock or 3:30 with the school kids and that across the road and parents picking kids up, because it was quite obvious that, he'd killed Michael and he was going after Glenn. The fact that Glenn could run and outran him. And then he turned around and come back and disappeared. It was a horrific scene for Glenn to come back to. He's just escaped within inches of his life, and then to come back and be faced with his brother's body. It's just something else for him.
One of the most common things about homicide, as anybody who's ever investigated them knows, or even just watches TV about them, is it's typically a crime of relationship. Stranger on stranger homicide is far less common than relationship. It can be a romantic, it can be family, it can be business relationship, it can be competitors in sporting, whatever it is, it's a relationship crime. But to see so much anger and so much damage done with one clean swipe of a Bowie knife to a throat, it seems odd that would be a non-acquaintance, doesn't it?
Yeah, and a lot of that closer style, knife stabbing tends to be a little bit more personal. There's a reason that you're doing that, is because of that anger. But I mean, we speak about it in the pod, that if we going through our victimology, we probably don't get to this guy because there is absolutely no connection with them other than they were in another electrical component store about half an hour before, and we've got CCTV. But as you know, CCTV is all well and good to give you a picture of somebody. Doesn't tell you who they are. It's not until later that night that uniform cops doing what uniform cops should be doing that we crack this within 24 hours. But yeah, I think back and think, do we get to this guy without that intervention from the uniform guys a couple of hours later? And I seriously doubt whether we would, because there was just no connection between the two of them, other than physically being in the same place at the same time.
But you gentlemen should know that this is not the first dog we've had on this show.
Sorry.
It's okay.
His name's Chester.
Hello, Chester. Chester was my dog's name when I was a kid growing up, so we got a lot in common. But we've had dogs, we've had lawn mowers and, landscaping crews. We've had rain, everything. It's all good.
Chester's a tiny little Maltese that thinks he's a Rottweiler at the moment, so I apologise for that.
That's all right.
So as Scott was saying, in the pod, I actually sit back and I ask Scott and Clive, who was another detective working with us, did it concern you when we were leaving, work about, midnight, 1 a.m. in the morning, that we didn't have a lot to go on? And their answer was essentially, well, it does, it's in the back of your mind, but policing and investigation work evolves and things develop. But in this case, we really had, outside of the description and his accent, we didn't have much to go on at all. As the evening progressed, we pretty much finished it at midnight. But it wasn't until the early hours of the morning, probably about 2 o'clock-ish, 1:30, 2 o'clock, that uniform police in Centennial Park in Sydney. So Fairfield is a long way from Centennial Park and from the city. That uniform police driving through Centennial Park has effectively come across a stolen car. And we were lucky that they actually did a really thorough job. And it all starts at the most basic things of doing a transport check on the car. And they did that and then come up with stolen. So, they hopped out and then they went up and looked in the car and here's a chap asleep in the car. So they've woken him and this bloke has just gone berserk. And it's one thing, I think, to, have an altercation with police that, you're turning up to a fight or a neighbour's dispute or something like that where it can, change like that. But you're waking someone up that is asleep, locked in a car, and he just turns it on. And it was massively on this blue. So he was then taken into custody and taken to Waverley Police Station. The car was left because at this stage they had a bloke asleep in the stolen car. So they took him back to the police station. He was still bunging it on and everything there. And it wasn't until a SOCO, so we have forensic officers, they do fingerprinting and that sort of stuff at crime scenes and that. Kind of looked at the bloke, could hear his accent and put two and two together and said to the police there, Fairfield had a murder last night and this bloke kind of looks a bit like him, brief description wise. So the phone call was made back to our bosses at Fairfield and that led to an investigation team going down to the scene. And things started to develop a bit about the car and could this actually be our offender? So they organised for a roster tow and the car was towed back to Waverley Police Station and then they started to go through it, do the forensic examination because someone was already there. And so he started to go through and they come across a hunting knife. So a big Bowie knife that had blood on it. So things are starting to progress. Also, there was electrical components and there was a book that they found in the car as well called the Anarchist Cookbook. So the police then are looking they find this book, they've got the knife with blood on it and they've seen electrical components. They were fearful that there was a bomb inside the car. So police station shut down, police bomb squad comes out, examines the car, and the car's clear. So there's a lot of components, but nothing was put together. So this is all adding time to the investigation and going through. So with the factors of his accent, he's absolutely turned it on. The knife, we've got blood. It was looking stronger and stronger that this was the offender. So they looked at his property that he had on him, and he had a new wallet, which just kind of didn't fit right. So they thought, this is really looking like it's him. Let's go back and do a forensic examination at Centennial Park where he was. So they organised police to come out and doing line searches and everything. And it wasn't until they come across a rubbish bin, and they've looked inside the rubbish bin, and here's the identification and driver's license and bank cards for our victim, Michael Furlong. So
the wallet he was arrested with was Michael Furlong's wallet. So when he's come into the custody suite at Waverley, they've booked the victim's wallet up as the offender's, because that was in his pocket at the time.
In the darkest of nights, you need a light you can trust. That's why we rely on Streamlight. Whether you're investigating a scene, navigating through uncharted territory, or just need a dependable flashlight for those unexpected moments, Streamlight is your go-to source. With over 45 years of innovation, Streamlight crafts rugged, high-performance flashlights that can withstand the toughest conditions. From tactical torches for law enforcement to everyday carry lights, Streamlight has you covered. Join the Streamlight community today and see why professionals trust Streamlight for their lighting needs. Visit streamlight.com to find your perfect light. Streamlight, lighting your way through the shadows.
Which, I mean, the moral to that tale pretty much is, without these uniform guys doing what they're doing, you guys know what it's like. You don't know who you're pulling over in a car. You don't know who you're speaking to at any particular time. Just that routine stop of propping and checking somebody can be highly dangerous. If this guy wakes up and grabs the knife and goes at the cops with the knife, we've got tragedy written all over it there. But then I think back to some of the arrests of serial killers, and Bundy comes to mind. Was arrested by a traffic cop because his blinker was broken, his indicator was broken. So these little things stumble into much bigger things, and the cautionary tale that we older heads in policing say to the young guys: just don't be complacent when you're speaking to people. You don't know what you've got.
And you're so right. And you know what it is? It's cops doing their job.
100%.
That's what it comes down to. You brought up Ted Bundy. The Oklahoma City bond, Timothy McVeigh gets pulled over because he's speeding, right? I think it was a speeding summons you gave him, or the plates didn't match or something weird like that. Son of Sam, 2 parking summonses, that a uniformed cop wrote. It's amazing. And Dan and I have both been in that situation. I want to ask you guys, what's the feeling when you get that call of, hey, we got someone here you might want to look at?
There's a bit of excitement. There's a fair bit of excitement. Despite your weariness, and let's face it, we've probably only had a couple of hours sleep, if that. At that point, you're up for it, and the excitement, because you're looking at solving this, and at the end of the day, that's the goal. That's the number one goal. I've got to solve this. I've got to put this offender before the court, and and I've got to bring closure for everybody, including me.
This case, I think we were blessed that Glenn, despite the situation that he was in, got a really good description of the offender, and that helped later in the evening. But also having Glenn enabled us to go to the electronics store where they were before, coming before Chantronics, because he was inside the store. And essentially what had happened is that Glenn and Michael and Glenn were in the store looking for components before they come to Chantronics. And our offender was inside that store. And our offender, we've got the CCTV footage, so it's not having aisles that are separated by, big shelving, so you can't see. They're effectively low, so, at chest height, so you can see all throughout the store, no matter what aisle you're in. And the CCTV depicts him standing and just watching Michael and his Glenn walking up and down the aisle looking for components. And this bloke is just fixated on them to the point where they're at the counter speaking to the shop assistant at the register, and the offender comes up and is standing next to them. Unbeknownst to Michael and Glenn, Michael and Glenn then walk out the store and he follows them out.
Chilling.
Which is really chilling when you watch that, knowing that half an hour later, what had happened.
Yeah, well, it's not even half an hour. It's only from that store to the Chantronics store is 10 minutes max. So he's obviously walked out. They're in their car. He finds his car. He finds them, follows them to Smithfield, because he doesn't go in the Chantronics store. Glenn and Michael and Glenn walk in the store, but he's confident of what car that they're in, where they've parked it, enough to go up to them and to bring him back to the car and have him in that vulnerable position, and he takes his life. It is just chilling. And when we look at the CCTV footage, it just adds that extra layer of, the hairs on the back of your spine just go, you get that tingle.
The predator stalking his prey.
100%.
Did he make any statements? Was this straight out robbery, just very elaborate and very violent, or was there another motive? Or he didn't make any statements?
He denied it. He denied having ever been to Smithfield. Gave a pretty weak alibi about a girl that he didn't name, staying at her place in a place nearby that he didn't name. It was, it wasn't me. Which, it wasn't until later on that we really got, and we still haven't got 100% picture, because it was all done it all came out in psych reports, which we really don't get hold of. But there was no tangible alibi for us to try and pick apart. It was it wasn't me. Don't know what you're talking about, gents.
So it wasn't until the court stage that he essentially pleaded not guilty, but it was on the grounds of mental illness. And
we also found the sheath for that knife at the scene. It was dropped at the scene, so a wider search came up with the sheath, and we tracked that knife, the sale of that knife, to him in a
army disposal store.
Army disposal store in the city.
So we don't get given the psychiatric reports, pre-trial. We were under the impression, we knew that he'd be pleading not guilty on the ground of mental illness, and it isn't until the trial starts and the reports are tendered over. So the court process was over extremely quickly because he was found not guilty on the grounds of mental illness. When we evaluate those psych reports, he was a paranoid schizophrenic, and he, at the stage of Michael's murder, was under the belief that he was being tracked by the AFP, so the Australian Federal Police, and he had the delusion, that the Australian Federal Police had administered toothpaste, which had been administered with a drug, and that drug in his toothpaste allowed the Australian Federal Police to effectively record anything that he was saying, because, you know, through his larynx. So he just had this delusional thought that the cops had drugged his toothpaste, and that allowed them to listen into all his thoughts, all his conversations, and this sort of stuff. Just
for some
crazy.
reason, thought that Michael was an AFP officer.
Yeah.
And cutting his throat was a demonstration to the AFP, leave me alone.
Yeah. So in that store where we see the CCTV footage, he's picked Michael as being an AFP police officer in the shops, and that he was following him. And Sorrel was just under the impression, well, I'm going to take you out, and I'll show you a sign to leave me alone. And my God, that's what he did. So it, you know, not only it highlights the risk to the general public, as, you know, with a psychiatric patient, you can be falsely labelled as something, but it also highlights the risk to police that, you know, if you're identified in any way, shape or form, whether you're in uniform or not, you're a target. And in Michael's case, unfortunately, you know, he just got labelled as a police officer, and he wasn't. He was just a normal member of the community, just out shopping, trying to do his best, and got murdered. So there's a lot of twists in the story. That wasn't the only wild one. 10 years previous to this, when he was 19, he had a drug syndicate set up, and he had careers running from essentially from Bali back to Western Australia. So Sorrel lived in Western Australia at that time, and they were bringing in drugs for him. Not a high level amount of drugs, but just, you know, being careered back and forth. So he was in charge of this syndicate, but the syndicate ended up losing all his money. The boys liked to punt at the tab and lost all his money. So he then was organising, that led him to come back to Western Australia. But why he was doing the small syndicate stuff was he was trying to finance bringing in a bigger importation of pure heroin to Western Australia. So he had set, as a 19-year-old, a plan, and his plan was essentially to hijack a plane, fly with the pilot to Papua New Guinea, where his intention was to kill the pilot.
A light plane, not a commercial aircraft.
Yeah, sorry, a light plane. Fly it to Papua New Guinea. He was going to parachute, set the plane to crash in the ocean, parachute into Papua New Guinea, obtain the drugs, attach it to a cargo ship coming back to Sydney, and then he was going to come back to Sydney, snorkel, get the drugs back off the hull of the ship, and then he's in possession of all these drugs. So this is back in 1991, and he was 19, and this information come to Western Australian Police, and at the time, they just thought, this is too far-fetched and this is bullshit.
I was going to say, Tom and Dan, if you had somebody come into your precinct and say, this guy's going to do this, what's your first reaction?
Go ahead,
You're
Dan.
yeah. I think it was the same reaction as the Western Australians, mate. You're nuts.
Yeah, you don't know what to say. You say you're nuts. Maybe you go along with them, tell them, you know what? I need you to go home. I need you to come back in exactly 14 years and 2 days. And I will have devised a full plan to execute, okay? Because if he's that crazy, he might listen to that kind of stuff. You know?
Or in the NYPD's really messed up sense of humor, I probably would have had a conversation with him. Well, see that guy over there? Pointed to Dan. He knows all about that. He knows how to do it. He knows the airline to take. He's a master sky jumper. Go talk to him.
And here's his cell number.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, we would mess with each other. Without a doubt, we would put it on somebody. Somebody would be dealing with this guy, this lunatic. Yeah.
For years afterwards.
Yeah. But, you know, that's another part of police work that's universal, right? You bring up the mental health issues with these people that are involved in some of these cases. And there are significantly mentally ill people in this world who have no treatment, no medications, and who are wandering, and many of them never hurt anybody except themselves, maybe. But some of them really are dangerous people. And you brought up the thing about this gentleman is in the back of a car that he stole after he did a homicide, sleeping off whatever he's sleeping off. And you're two uniformed cops. Hey, stolen car, get out. We're going to handcuff you and take the car. And you're thinking it's a simple stolen car arrest, a property crime. And the guy jumps up at you, got a Bowie knife. He just killed. He's okay with killing again. And he thinks you know everything. He thinks you're after him for killing that guy last night. And that's when the danger comes. I had a very bizarre incident one time. I'll tell you a quick story. I was in a felony warrant squad. I went to pick up a guy in East Harlem with my partner for a simple drug sale warrant. Simple, go down to court. The judge will probably give you a new date. Get out of here. He probably sold drugs to an undercover cop. So a dime a dozen warrant in New York City. Went to this house, 7:30 in the morning in East Harlem, summertime. Knocked on the door. The mother opens the door. I said, excuse me, can we come in and talk? And all of a sudden I hear somebody sliding under a bed, and I hear another guy jumping out a window. The guy sliding under the bed was the guy I was looking for. The guy jumping out the window was his brother, who the night before did a homicide. I had no idea. He thought we were there for him. Jumps out the window on top of a fence, scales the fence, he's running around in his underwear. And I'm like, I should probably chase him because I know he did something, but I have no idea who I'm chasing or why. That happens.
Yeah. And that sort of hits me when you say that. Somebody runs from you, you're chasing them, and you don't know why you're chasing them. They're running away, so you've got to go and get them.
That's happened.
Yeah. So,
and you know what? No, go ahead, Scott.
Go, Tom. We're putting together a series on the homicide, the murder of Lisa Harnham, at the moment, who was thrown out a 15-story balcony in the centre of Sydney by her fiance. But many years before, two friends of mine went to arrest him on a warrant, and he was perfectly charming, speaking to them was fine until the moment he snapped and became extremely violent. Now, we're not talking about two rookies. We're talking about guys with a lot of years' experience and were able to read the cues, but he had no cues. He went from 0 to 100 miles an hour in a fraction of a second and bit the ear off one of these boys. And it is. And the other one got knocked out by his mother, who belted him over the head from behind. So just that danger that we all know and we speak about is always there. It's always present.
100%. And all I was going to say was, here's a perfect example of there's bad guys all over the world, and you can be there, here, doesn't matter. All these stories, you could take your story, what you said, and put it in the Bronx. It's all over the world. The one thing I wanted to touch on was the dramatic meeting you have regarding this case with Luke. Years later, Luke is Michael's son, who you said was 9 years old when this happened, but you have a get-together meeting with him. Tell us about that.
I'll just go back a little bit. I think putting this story together, Scott and I, we both spoke, and we kind of had an understanding where we wanted to go with our podcasts. But we really had to give the families the opportunity to have their voice. And I said to Scott, mate, we're going to have to try and find the family, and we're, not only for our own peace of mind, but we have to give them the opportunity if they'd like to speak. Because I said, mate, if we did this and they wanted to speak and we didn't ask them, how bad would we feel? Like, I would feel terrible. So we didn't have, we couldn't go into the cop shop and just look them up and say, well, presto, here we know where they are. Mate, I jumped on Facebook and just started searching, and I found a Luke Furlong, and I just sent him a message. I go, Rogues, I think I found him. I'm going to send him a message. And, it was purely, hi, Luke. I'm Peter, working with Scott. We're doing our own podcast. We investigated your dad's murder. Look, I'm not 100% sure it's you, but I'm pretty sure it is. Would you like to be involved? And within 2 minutes, my phone was ringing. And it was Luke. And he said, mate, thank you so much for reaching out to us. I want to be on, want to help you out in any way, shape or form. He goes, I'm going to ring you back in a little minute. I'm going to go to my mum's, speak with my mum, and then we're going to ring him. So brilliant. So I got off the phone to Luke, and I rang Scott, and I told him, and mate, it wasn't that long later, and the phone rang. And Luke had said to us, I was 9 when Dad was murdered, and all my entire adult life, because his dad was murdered 22 years ago in 2002. So he said, all my adult life, all I've ever wanted to do was to meet the detectives that worked on my dad's case and solved it, to thank them. And, I seriously just want to have a beer with you blokes and just say thanks, on behalf of the family and everything. And we were kind of blown away. I thought, well, thank God we did. And, we organised to have a Zoom meeting with them because they're in Brisbane, so we're in New South Wales, so the other state. And we kind of set a Zoom up, and we didn't know how long it was going to go for. Our first Zoom meeting with them went for 3.5 hours. It was just phenomenal. Their openness, they just wore their hearts on their sleeves and just released everything to us. It was speaking with Luke and Colleen about things. Luke had that desire to speak with someone, and he didn't know how to find us. But he was a true crime fan, a massive true crime fan, and he had actually reached out to a podcast, a true crime podcast, and said, this is my dad's case. It's got twists and turns that you wouldn't believe. It's really, really interesting. No one's covered it. Would you like to do it for our family? And he got an email back saying, sorry, mate, too busy. And that was 2 weeks before I rang. So they were just vested in telling their dad's story and the impact that it's had on their lives, because Sorrel, the offender, was found not guilty under mental illness. So that meant that he doesn't go to prison, but he's in the psychiatric ward. And in Australia, they're under the care of the Mental Health Review Tribunal. So every 6 months, their case is brought before a panel, and he could potentially be released. So for the last 22 years, every 6 months, their family has had to listen to the tribunal to say whether he stays in or whether he gets released. So they've been fighting this fight for 22 years to present day today with this tribunal in relation to Sorrel and whether Sorrel would get released. So I'll come back to that point in a moment, but we had this great meeting, Zoom meeting with them and interview, and with finished up on that evening, and Luke reached out and says, I want to come down to Sydney and meet you guys. And we said, you know what, mate, we'll come up and see you guys. So just after Christmas, I think it was, Rogues, we went up to Brisbane and spent some time with them over a weekend, and we ended up doing another interview with them. And because it was not to get information about the case, but it was to kind of sit back and say, we met your family 22 years ago. We're actually coming and sitting with you now. It was like rebonding. Seeing Luke, when we last saw Luke was 9, 10, and now he's an adult man. Luke's 29, 30. So, yeah, and a father. And we just had this relationship with them that we bonded, and we spent a really nice evening with them. And then we had the next day. So the next day we said, we're going to have coffee in this cafe before we leave in the afternoon. And Luke goes, I'm going to come back down. I want to see you. Yeah, mate, no dramas. So here we are. We're having breakfast with Luke, and Colleen didn't come. His mum didn't come. She was at home. And we didn't think anything of it. We're just having coffee and that sort of stuff. But Luke says, I've got something to ask you guys. And we're like, oh, yeah, mate, whatever. Because we said to them, listen, whatever you want to know, we will tell you. We'll be open, transparent. So there's no secrets. We want to let you know everything. And we cleared up some misconceptions that I had about Michael's death and that. But Luke said to us, he said, listen, can you take me to the scene where Dad was murdered? I think, it's very emotional. Like, you don't think that would have an effect on you, but for someone to sit back and say, can you take me to where my dad was killed, was phenomenal. It really was.
And
it was a really touching moment.
Yeah. He had spent a lifetime avoiding Smithfield, the suburb of Smithfield, because that was where Dad was killed. And then after this weekend that we'd spent with them, he had enough trust in us to say, guys, I want you to take me to that scene. This place that I'd have avoided for 23 years, I want you to take me there. It was quite humbling in a way, Hogs, wasn't it? That he trusted us enough to do that. So we arranged it. We took him out there. A few months later, he came down to Sydney, and we brought another colleague along who actually ran the job, Clive Ainley. Clive and I were both detective sergeants at the time at Fairfield, and Luke had only ever met Clive as a 9-year-old boy. And we took him through the crime scene.
I picked him up from where he was staying that day, and I kind of, do we capture this? Don't we capture this? So I thought, what, just press record and just sit it in the car. And the conversation, the emotion, the anxiety was real. I think for us it was that, that inner feeling of we had to look after him and care that day, to get him through that. And I could tell, he says, oh yeah, I'm nervous, and I could see that he was nervous, and so was I. So, we had near on a 45-minute to an hour drive till we got to the scene. And we didn't have the recording on all the time. We turned it off. And that was solely purely so he could, we could just forget about things until we got there. And then we turned it on shortly, just before arriving. And he had a sense of calm going to the scene. And driving, I remember driving along the Horsley Drive and then turning into O'Connell Street where Dad was murdered. And we just like a sense of calm come over us, because we were, compare it to 45 minutes an hour earlier, we were both so anxious, and like you could feel it within your body. But kind of just a sense of calm come over, and we obviously met Scott, and then we introduced him to Clive at the scene. And then we turned the mics off. We turned everything off. So he, we had that time with him. Nothing's recorded. And it was just, his time with us to go through the scene. And we were able to clear a lot of misconceptions that he had. Because, he was 9 and was growing up with the trauma of his dad being murdered. So his recollections are only what's in print media and that sort of thing. It's not something that they spoke about. Although, they were impacted every 6 months because of the Mental Health Review Tribunal. But Luke was under the impression that Dad was stabbed multiple times where he wasn't. He spoke about the vicinity of where he was and where the car was and where his dad eventually laid. And he spoke of the fear that his dad, like, being finished off. So he thought that, he stabbed his dad, he chased after Glenn, and then he come back and effectively finished him off. And, he speaks about the inner torment and the fear that he had about, his dad's last moments. And was he thinking of him? Was he thinking, oh, shit, how am I get out of this? I'm going to die. Was he thinking about his boys? Those sorts of natural things that you would think about, what is your loved one's last thoughts? So we were able to clear that up for him, that, as hard as it was for us to say, your dad's throat was slit to the point of almost decapitation, he had an inner peace that Dad had stumbled and died almost instantly, that it was quick. Because we know that Sorrel had chased Glenn, but then come back to the scene, and he come back to him and he robbed him. That's where he's taken his wallet and gone. So he did come back to his body. But I think, Luke had that inner peace now, that he knew that Dad was gone, and that Dad didn't have that last moment of terror. He just had the incident, which it was peaceful for Glenn.
Yeah.
For Luke, sorry.
Both Luke and Colleen have said that post that it was a very cathartic experience for him. It's closed the circle for him, and his life is a lot calmer now because he's dealt with those demons, and we're able to tell him that Dad didn't lie there mortally wounded, just waiting to die in a panic. So it's closed that circle, and he's become calmer in his life as a result, which is really heartening to hear from our point of view, because we don't normally get to close those circles, boys, do we? We move on to our next set of victims' families.
You're right. You don't get to do that.
Right.
I'm glad you gentlemen did get a chance to do that with such an impactful case, such a crazy anomaly sort of homicide case. Glad you both did get a chance to do that. And I I could probably sit here and talk with you guys 5 more hours and listen to you guys tell the stories, and I know our audience can hear it too. Hear the very real concern that you have for the families and the victims, and that's something that's common among detectives. You become a detective, you deal with family. If you don't have real, genuine concern for the people you're dealing with, you're ultimately not going to be that effective. You can't do one without the other, right, Tom? I think our audience is probably, when they listen to this, is going to go, wow, these two guys care.
Yeah. Listen, cases don't go away. They just don't. They stick with you forever. I mean, Dan and I and you guys could rattle off a case from 1990, whatever, with no problem, with not a hesitation. But when you get a family member that was young at the time and then now is an adult to retrace the steps and talk to you about it. But thinking of the job that you guys did meant the world to him. He wanted to meet you. And, you told the story of that one podcast turning him down because that wasn't meant to be. He was meant to hook up with you guys, and that's it. We say it all the time, things happen for a reason. And he was meant to get together with you guys. And like you said, Scotty, close that circle. And you guys are incredible for a number of reasons, the success you're having. But to do what you did and not just, hey, it's a closed case, I really don't want to go through this again. You took this kid, and took him in and did what you needed to do. And that's a credit to both of you.
It's a credit to the profession. It shows the true light of the concern that detectives and investigators have, and cops all over the world, for people who are victims of crazy crimes. And it shows the humanity. We're not robots. We're not machines. We're people, and we have real feelings, and cases impact us. Cases stay with us because we care. And so you guys have highlighted that quite clearly today.
I guess if we can reach out to your listeners and say, this is our first series, and the title is If Tomorrow Never Comes. And please, if you could listen to it, because there's a meaning and there's a set of circumstances behind the reason why it's called If Tomorrow Never Comes. But please tune in and listen. It's quite touching. And I think ultimately, if, people, when they hear that song in the future, can, stop and pause and maybe reflect on Michael Furlong and his tragedy, because it's quite touching. I won't spoil it, but I think if, your listeners could go and listen to the story, it's quite touching.
I know for sure I'll be listening, watching True Detectives. And you're on which platforms are you on, gentlemen, currently?
Wherever you get your pods. We're on Spotify and Apple.
And I think if people can go to Sarah Ferris Media, we're there with Sarah's other podcasts of Conning the Con, Clueless, Stop the Killing. So we're on there with their family. So look, we're quite privileged with everything. Essentially, we're so privileged and grateful and humbled that Sarah found us and provided us with this opportunity, because without Sarah, this today wouldn't have happened. The podcast wouldn't have happened, and for us to relate in relation to Michael's story wouldn't have happened. Season 2 is coming soon. We're hopefully within the next month. And season 2 will be called The Last Fair. And it's another touching tale about re-establishing connection with family and the victim's family. And on this occasion, it's with Hubert's So the deceased's daughter, Melina, another touching tale. It really is heartbreaking.
Well, we're going to have you back for your season 2. That's going to happen. This is kind of part 1 that we wanted. We knew this story. We hooked up with you guys, you obviously through Sarah, and we wanted to get this story out first. But we are going to have you back on for your season 2, The Last Fair, for sure. Because, listen, the more is a big sandbox. We're not competitors. We're not any of that. We're a family. And getting these stories out and more people listening to it and you bringing more attention to it is what this is all about. And watching 2 detectives, everyone out there, you're going to see it. We're going to blast it. We're going to keep talking about it and put this out there as much as we can. And we cannot thank you 2 enough for taking the time, for being such incredible professionals in what you've done in your career and what you're doing now. Thank you for providing us and our audience an incredible story. Thank you.
Thanks, boys. Can't thank you
so
enough for allowing us to come on and
Anytime.
and promote it. And as you say, cops supporting cops. We're
Well, we have to. And the work that you
100%.
gentlemen have done your whole career and the work you're continuing to do is invaluable to the victims and their families and to people. These stories need to be told, don't they? They need to be shared. These are real human stories about real tragedies, resiliency, strength, bonding, human connection, all of it. These are fascinating. This is real life, guys. And you guys are sharing it. You've lived it and you're sharing it. And you are going to be incredibly successful with Watching Two Detectives. And I can't wait to listen to all your episodes. And we'll have you back. And we hope to break bread with you one day, or maybe put some shrimp on the barbie down there in Sydney.
Absolutely.
we call them prawns.
Yeah, they're bigger. They're better, right? Yeah.
And we didn't even get to talk about kangaroos that are out in the backyard. Seriously,
no.
boys.
Wallabies, yeah.
Yes.
We have something to look forward to now, other than the Last Fair kangaroos. We'll talk about
Kangaroos.
God bless, guys. Thank you very much. Huh?
Yeah.
Thank you. God bless as well. And we look forward to having you back. And we will blast social media out. And at this point in the show, Tom gets his chance to take us out as he always does.
Well, thanks, Dan. And this is the part that's important to us. We pray for all our law enforcement officers out there all over the world, because as you just heard, the dangers are all over the world. It's not just secluded to one city, one state, one country. They're all over the world. The dangers that law enforcement face every single day. So pray for them, pray for their families, that they get home safe at the end of their tours. And again, our selfless little plug, youtube.com/@goldshields, rumble.com/goldshields, and every audio platform you can think of. Watch us, follow us, subscribe, all that good stuff. And of course, our website, thegoldshieldshow.com. For Peter Hogan, Scott Rogan, my partner, Dan Murphy, thank you again, gentlemen, from Australia. Everyone out there, stay safe. We will see everybody soon.